Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Welcome to another painting demo. Today I want to share with you the process of this painting of Snoqualmie Falls and talk about how to paint rock and waterfall. So before I start the color version, I start off with a simple value study. And the purpose of that, aside from figuring out the values, is also to try to break it down and simplify what I see into very basic primitives. Because there are a lot of details inside of this scenery, and if we try to draw them all, if we try to paint them all, it's going to be a huge headache for me, and I don't have enough focus and patience for that. So instead, I study the lighting and I study the structure, try to simplify what I see into basic primitives. So here you can see I simplify those rocks into something that looks like a staircase. This makes the read much simpler, and I am able to understand how the lighting works in this scene. So after I simplify down to the primitives, then I start to articulate the shape of the rock according to what I already established. So it will retain its overall structure, but it will be a little bit more articulated, it will be a little bit more organic. So here comes the value study. I start off with the middle value, which is everything that's not lit. So we have a direct light source, which is the sunlight. And it's coming from above. It's early afternoon, so the sun is pretty high up. So we keep that staircase primitive in mind, and we can easily understand how the lighting works in this scenery. Anything that is not lit by the sun from the above will be in the shadow. And in this case, the value of the waterfall and the rock that's lit, they are pretty similar, so I'm just going to leave them white. The middle value will include the background trees, which is in the shadow, and all the rock that is facing towards us, which is also in the shadow and part of the waterfall. But also the river and the top, I want that to have a little bit of differentiation between that and the rock and the waterfall, so that will be somewhat in the middle value. So in our second layer of the value study, we paint the dark. So we look for darker things mostly inside of the middle value area. This will help the rock to be a little bit more defined and have illusion of more details. But it also complete the value range to make the painting more complete. Now I understand this value study is very rough. Without a photo, it's actually even hard to understand what we're looking at. But part of the purpose of value study is not just to make a painting practice, but also have your mind go through the whole process of simplification of the scenery. So now when I'm doing the color version, I have a pretty good idea and process in mind. And since this is going to be the final painting, I spend a lot more time doing the drawing. That being said, a nature scenery like this is a lot more forgiving than, let's say, a portrait, because you can have one rock a little bit bigger than the other, you can have the waterfall position slightly off, and it's going to be okay, as long as it still looks like the scenery you're trying to paint. So in this case, accuracy is a little bit less important than capturing the structure of the scenery. So I switch over to my mechanical pencil to get a little bit more detail and cleaner lines. So as you can see, I'm a lot more articulate with the rock shape and everything. And it's very easy to lose the sense of big picture when you are starting to focus on the detail, even just for a little bit. So remember to squint your eyes, focusing on the big picture, on the big structure. So here I do a little bit of cleanup on my palette and also my paper, so I erase some of the messier lines on my drawing. So the first wash, I pretty much just pre-wet the whole paper, because the light on the rock, because aside from the really white foam on the waterfall, all the light area also have color. So I mix a light warm color for the rock, mostly yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, but I also neutralize that with a little bit of blue so it doesn't get too warm. And I just start to paint in the light area. and it's going to spread out very softly, and which is great because I just want to get the color of the light in. I don't really want to define anything just yet. So stay relaxed when you painting this first wash, especially wet onto wet. It's a very enjoyable state. So also the light of the background tree, keep the background quite abstract. And I start to give a little bit of the value on the waterfall. Soften that edge with just water, so it will have a little bit of a soft edge. But also leave out a little bit of white for the white foam. So now I spray a little bit of water and I try to pre-mix the color that I'm going to use. So mostly the dark side of the rock. So I try my best to make sure I have enough mixture. So that's why you see a huge puddle there. But also some dark of the tree in the background. So even though they are the dark side of the objects in the scenery, they are actually the middle value in my painting. So that's something to keep in mind. It's pretty important not to go that dark that soon. So start out with the background, get a little bit of value in the trees in the background. Again, keep them abstract. They are just the background. I don't want to define the tree that much. Just give it a little sense of value. And we connect that shape to the shadow that's casting on the rock and the river. So think about connection while you're doing this wash. That's why I needed to mix a lot more color, because it will be easier for me to connect the shape while I'm painting. So now I connect to the rock and the waterfall. And like I said, it's very easy to lose yourself in the detail once you're starting to paint individual elements like these. So it's important that you squint your eyes a little bit, look at the overall big shape, and try not to look too deep into the detail while you're painting. Just focusing on the big shape and the connection. If you spend too much time trying to articulate everything you see, the wash is going to dry and it's not going to look nice and clean. So I continue the wash down all the way down, and I soften the edge with clean water so that it has some sense of atmosphere, and we give it a soft vignette feel for our painting. So we continue our second wash. So I pretty much use up all the color that I mixed, so I kind of have to mix it again on the fly. But since I don't need to connect the left side to the right side because of the waterfall in between, I can afford to mix a little bit more while I am painting. Some dark in the rock. Be a little bit more careful when you're painting around the waterfall. We do want some hard edges and a little bit of dry brushing to interpret those water foams and spraying. And continue the wash in the left. There's a big middle value shape, and against the waterfall it creates a lot of contrast. So that's what makes this painting, the scenery, very interesting. So if you just look at the photo at a glimpse, you actually don't really see all the details in the rock. You see that big contrast in the front, the dark rock and the waterfall. So focus on that instead of trying to figure out all the details that you see. Now the foreground, there's another rock cliff. We paint that in, and we also try to connect the shape as well. And mix some quick green color for the trees that's on those rocks, just to give a little bit more variation in this scenery. So with that, you can already starting to see the sense of structure and lighting. And now I give a little bit of a value and color for the river above. This will create some separations between the water surface and the rock. And the color of the water surface is a little bit warm towards green. And on the left, I use a lot more dry brushing because there's some shimmeries on the water surface and also some foams from the waterfall. And I come back in and give a little bit of details in the water. There's some stuff underneath the water. That river is quite shallow, so just a little hints of detail. So that's our second wash and is about 70% there already. And now we are going to add some dark as our third wash. So I pre-wet some of the areas in the tree background because I want to have some soft shape and merge the tree background to the rock and the river. Again, we try to connect as much as possible, focusing on the big shape. And there are some details inside the shadow like the wooden log and everything. We just briefly suggest that with a little bit of value difference. We don't really need to define that very clearly. That wooden log in the background barely contribute to the whole shape of the picture. So if it doesn't really contribute to the whole shape of the picture, you don't really need to focus in on that too much. So connect the dark to the rock. And be careful not to start to darken everything that you see. We do want to maintain quite a bit of the middle value. So only look for areas that will bring out more contrast and look at the photos, study the photo a little bit more, see where the dark cracks and the occluded shadow are. Those are the places that you want to darken just a little bit more. So the dark is supposed to create some more textures and bring out just more dimensionality. So don't go too complicated on those. It's very tempting to do that when you are starting to paint the detail and trying to see if they will make your painting look more finished and refined. But try to resist the temptation of trying to do too much. A good rule of thumb is that when you're just starting to like it, it's probably a good time to wrap that area up. Also, try to limit your brushstroke as much as possible. For that purpose, I don't use a brush very small. I actually rarely use a very small brush. This will force me not to focus on detail too much. A good brush, good quality brush, goes a long way. It'll have very nice point in the front for you to do a little bit of detail work, but it's also big enough so that it has enough paint on the brush, so I don't need to constantly reload the brush. So as you can see, after adding some dark, the whole thing start to look a lot more complete. And now I go back and start to define a couple things here and there a little bit more, especially the rock. Give some area a little bit more value. There are some areas that I didn't paint during the first wash, so it's now a good time to get those area back. So define the waterfall just a little bit more. And here I try to interpret that thin layer of waterfall. You see a little bit of rock behind it. So I pre-wet the area and do some wet on wet on those. So you see that kind of lost and found quality of the watercolor, which interprets the thin layer of waterfall quite nicely. So this painting is done in about an hour and a half, give or take. So I'm happy to keep it loose and almost a little bit abstract as well. But I do like the end result, and I do believe that I captured the movement of the waterfall as well as the massiveness and the structure of the rocks and a very nice warm lighting. So I hope you like this painting, and I hope this is helpful for you next time you are painting a nature scenery with a lot of big rocks. Hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful weekend wherever you are. Check out more of my videos and also go to my website at Cafe Watercolor, sign up to get a Fast Track Watercolor PDF guide. If you're new to watercolor, you can also check out my Watercolor Essential course, link down below. I am Eric from Cafe Watercolor. See you next time.